Hello and welcome back to our broadcast. This is the Executive Network, and we're pleased to bring you this broadcast again today, Thursday, 27th August. It does look like the year is flying swiftly by. And I'm glad, of course, that you and I are given the grace uh, be uh, to be alive and to be well. I'm thankful, and I know you are as well. Okay, we want to welcome those joining us for the first time. This is the Executive Network, and it's a pleasure to have you with us on this broadcast. A special thanks and warm welcome indeed to all of our esteemed viewers and members of the community. Right, we're going to go straight into the presentation. It's a progression from where we stopped last week. And if you really look at this closely, uh, I want to draw your attention to uh, this this subject, which I've titled "The Implications of the Kingdom Life." Um, if you look closely at that very statement that God made, which we always seem to refer to on this platform, God said, "Let us make man in our own image." You would probably observe with me that it seemed as if something had gone on before that statement was made. It was as if there was a conversation, and then in response, and God said. Normally, you don't begin a statement with "and I said." There must have been something that went on, and that is the thought I would like us to consider very briefly before we really get into this proper. And God said probably suggests that either there was a thought in his mind, and that thought led to what I would call a divine response. Or maybe there was a conversation between God and entities, divine entities, so to say, as if God was in a board meeting. And then God made known what his intention was. Well, both of these thoughts are not entirely surprising because if you look at what we are understanding God to be or who we are understanding God to be, we know that he does not just act. He always seems to have an end in mind before he initiates action. So there must have been something on his mind that he intended to do that required him to make a determination that, well, the appropriate response here is to have man in our image. And I suppose that is something that we probably see through scriptures. And the thought is, I need someone, people, to look after this piece of property for me. And I have a specification. I have a very clear specification of what I need this person to be. It's akin to what normally transpires when someone wants to recruit someone into employment. You would start with the job description, and then you have your person specification. Both of these will then inform how you go to the labor market to find someone that will fit into the mold for that particular job. that you want to execute. And then, of course, you invite them, you interview them, and you find that once you find that they are the right fit, then you employ or you engage them. Of course, you onboard them into your employment. So think about that process, which we seem to do all the time. We don't just employ and just say, well, I like this person, I'm employing that person. No, that there must have been something that would precede the whole of the recruitment process. But think about this as well. God wanted someone to take on a massive job of managing the earth and all that it contained, and it had its clear specification. That specification is what we've been speaking about starting from last week, or maybe even before last week. And we're saying that mankind seemed to be God's model of life to govern the earth territory on his behalf. It had to be this kind of being, if you like. It has to be this specification for God to be confident and to feel like comfortable with the whole notion of entrusting the governance, the administration of the government of earth. Otherwise, God will probably keep on doing it by himself. And that's the thought here. Mankind is God's model of life for earth's governance. And that's the thought that the scripture captures very beautifully in Psalm 115, verse 16. Let me read it to remind us. The highest heavens belong to the Lord, but he gave earth to human beings. So human beings, whatever that meant, whatever it contained, whatever that represented, was a divine idea for earth management. So we can really look at ourselves and say, I'm actually God's idea. Mankind is God's idea. I'm exactly who God thought was necessary on the earth. I'm not an accident. I didn't just turn up. No accident brought me here. I seem to be an exact thought. I'm not an afterthought. I'm a before thought, meaning a lot of thought went and preceded my appearance. And this talks to me about the real value of the human. That the human is not some form of accident. All right. So we then saw that there was this so-called first Adam, who was the initial model of this life. And as far as God was concerned, he had gotten his man. Let me rephrase that. As far as God was concerned, he had gotten his first recruit, because we know clearly, according to scriptures, that this Adam apparently or actually represented two versions, male and female. And he said, both of you are entirely adequate to be my managers on earth. Once I hand over this job to you, I don't need to look back. I'm entirely confident that you are able. And this was precisely what we saw. Then, after he had made them, he clearly declared that now it's over to you. You be in charge of all that I've made. What manner of confidence was that? God did not think that the woman could not manage the earth. Neither did he think that the man was inadequate. As far as was concerned, this model of life, this being that he had made, called human beings were perfectly adequate. They were going to grow into the job, they were going to grow in the job, but there was no question about their adequacy. So the female is adequate just as the male is adequate for whatever God wanted done. So there is no, the whole idea of the superiority of a particular model of human over another is fallacy according to scripture. It's a strange idea and God knows nothing about it. Now, be mindful that we're talking about God's original model, what he wanted done, which was not just an afterthought, which was thought about, and you would imagine that there was a divine conclusion on the matter. And God executed it. Now, of course, we understand that there was an interruption of that life. Whatever God thought about that man was somehow compromised. And the compromise was not because God did not do a good job, it was because of his extent of trust in that he equipped this person to have what you will refer to as the will, the ability to choose. You could say, was God taking a risk? Maybe so. But you couldn't make someone in God's image without this component. The fact that God himself is Elohim, someone who initiates creation, meant that if he was to create anyone in his image, then that being must necessarily contain this component as well. But that component depends, the key driver of will is the knowledge that feeds it. Let me restate that. The power of will is not so much in the exercise thereof, but in the feel that drives it into motion. And the feel that drives the will is knowledge. The knowledge that drives that will into action. So, and that's why God said, hey, mankind, let's be clear. The only kind of feel, the only kind of knowledge that should be in you must be mine, must be the body of knowledge that I also possess. And as long as that is the case, you would always function as my image, you function exactly like me. Simply because we are drawing from the same source, or you are just drawing from me as your source. But the moment you have any other kind of knowledge flowing into you, in fact, it doesn't even need to be an inflow, as long as you have anything that contaminates or is a foreign body in your content of knowledge, then it pollutes the entire stream. The entire reservoir of knowledge in you is polluted. In fact, I think I need to restate that. God was not even thinking in terms of reservoir, he was thinking in terms of a stream. So I am your source, and my knowledge streams into you. The moment something comes into your container and corrupts it, then the stream becomes corrupt, and the will be powered by something that is not quite the original. It will have been corrupted. And really, this was the issue. So, and God said, let's be very clear. The moment this happens, we have to shut down the inflow of life from me. We would have to do a remediation. We will have to take care of this business before we can restart it. We can't just allow that corruption to go on forever. So God, in his wisdom, put in, I want to say this in a way that will be easy to follow. It put in finiteness in infinite life. It was as if it put on a control valve, something to turn the inflow of life on or off. However, the default state was to be turned on. So it's almost like as if you come into your room and you put on the light, and the light is permanently on. But that light could also be switched off. But the intended default mode was for the light to be switched on. So it would always be on. And that's what it means that the man had eternal life. It means there was an ever streaming, an ever inflow of life from God into man, and it was not meant to be interrupted. So as long as man was connected to God, the life would always flow perpetually, as long as the source was still there. But that source could not countenance a corruption of its streams, of its stream. So, and God said, as soon as that happens, we would have to turn this off and do a deep clean before we allow this life source or this source of water to flow back in, or this source of life to flow back in. So think about it. As soon as man exercises will in the way that he ought not, God said, well, forewarned is to be foreharmed. So we already warned you about this. We have no choice but to interrupt. So the interruption happened, and that was the experience of the first Adam. Naturally, because Adam had the male and female, they had the capacity to reproduce life, so they could only produce or reproduce whatever was in their own content. And so it was that everyone that came after them had this contamination in them, whether they like it or not. I mean, they needed not to have done anything wrong. It was just there. It was like permanent stain written into the DNA forever. Okay. But God, of course, executed his remediation plan, which we speak about quite often on this platform, and that was modeled by the same Adam. However, it was the second Adam. This Adam, of course, we know to be Jesus the Christ. And God had an endearing name by which he referred to him. He said, "This is my only begotten Son." I want to speak a bit into that, because no matter how often we speak about this, it seems to sound new again and again. Simply put, God was really saying, this is the only one I have now that hasn't got this corruption. This fully and perfectly represents me. This is my exact representation. It is my image and my likeness. This is exactly the one that I had and I thought of right in the beginning. He does not have this corruption that you all have now somehow been stained by. He does not have that. So now hear God's endearing word. Matthew 7:17 verse 5. He said, "This is my beloved Son, in whom I'm well pleased." Of course, in whom I'm well pleased. Hear ye him. That is, this one has no contamination that you all had. So if there's anyone that I could depend on entirely, this is the one. If there's anyone that could represent me totally, fully, this is the one. If there's any restoration, the goal of my restorative work is to get you all to look like this one. In other words, he is now your model. This is the life that you are meant to live. In fact, God was saying, this was your past, but also this is your future. But we must do something in the present to get you back to your future, which in effect is actually your past. So you can now appreciate even more so John 3:16. God so loved the world that he gave who is only begotten Son, that whosoever believes in him should not perish, but have everlasting life. Once a river is cut off from its source, it goes on to perishing. It would dry up in time. So think about that whole idea. It would sound like this figurative. You said someone was going to die in a day, but they still live 990 something years, or 30 years. Oh God, you didn't mean it. Well, the point is, once you cut a river from source, it does not dry up immediately, but surely it will dry up. So now Jesus referred to himself many a times in scriptures, either as the Son of God and then as the Son of Man. Now you may be wondering, why this multiple reference? Why this dual reference? Well, I think that's very clear. I would say this, I would talk in terms of relativity. So it was talking relative to whatever context it was focusing on at each time. By Son of God, we understand it to mean that this particular one, has, or it depicts man's special relationship with God in the sense of a family, but not just a child in the family, someone who is grown enough in the family to represent the father and the father's business. In the closest you can think of, I suppose, is almost like an ambassador, but this ambassador is not an outsider to the family. Is actually a member of the family. Now, I understand that, for example, in the royal family, at least in the United Kingdom, when there is a family business to do, the monarch sends a member of the family, a full-grown member of the family, to represent the family's interest and the family's business. And that person has the competence to represent the family and do business on behalf of the family. As a matter of fact, he represents the government of the monarch. Now, so you say, son of the monarch, son of the head of government, because it's not just talking in family terms, but also saying this person has the authority, has the right of representation of the head of government. So, Son of God here is saying, I fully represent him. I mean, I can do business on his behalf. This must have been what some of the Pharisees heard when they were saying, well, when they said I'm the Son of God, and they thought, how dare you claim to be in the same family as God, and to the extent that you represent him as an equal. They took up stones and wanted to stone him. Now, because they were not speaking English, they were speaking their local dialect, and they will have understood it. Even more so, they will have experienced that word, and they will have thought, no, there's no way you can ever represent God. They were angry, they were upset, they felt that he blasphemed, and they wanted to, execute him. Okay, now, Son of Man, really, when he said that, most people didn't have a problem with that, but they thought maybe how arrogant you will be. It was more of, well, you really think so highly of yourself, but it's all right. That's not too much of a problem, because Son of Man simply means, I'm like you. I can represent humanity. I'm as mortal as you are. I'm as frail as you are. I know your pains. I'm a man of sorrows, just like you are. I'm acquainted with your pain, just like you are. And so we're saying, I fully represent the human. But again, it's not child of man, son, meaning I embody all that humanity represents, and experiences. Okay, so the question then is, how can someone be so frail and yet be so strong at the same time? How can the only begotten Son be the Son of Man and the Son of God at the same time? And the suggestion here is that this is really God's model for mankind. It's like the meeting place of God and man. It really meant that this is God's idea of the life that the human should live in order to represent the government of God on earth. You could even put it this way, that if ever God wanted a human on earth that would represent him, that could do business with him, that could be his able ally and dependent, and someone with whom he could interdepend, this was it. This really is what it would look like. So Jesus was God's perfect idea of man. This was what he thought man would be like. This is what he thought of him right from the beginning. And you see, look at Jesus. He said, my life, no one takes away from me. I lay this down by myself. In fact, I had an agreement with my Father that I will lay it down and he will give it back to me. Think about that. Look at that. Look at that. Depiction of his relationship with the Father. He was saying, my father loves me and has given everything into my hand. Think about that. He's really saying, it's as if you have this global conglomerate, a huge organization represented in all of the continents, in every country, influencing everyone on earth, and then you have a son who is your ideal son, you have a daughter, and your daughter is exactly all that you ever wanted in a daughter. And you say, you know what? You know all these companies, you are taking over everything. So, and because he could trust this daughter totally. So we're saying the Father loves the Son and has given everything into his hand. Because this son, this daughter, this individual represented all that God ever wanted. Of course, we're not using the word son in the sense of a male. The word son here